and welcome back to DAOI Talks. This is another installment in our expert series. Our guest today is Mike Graves of Long Fei Tai Chi Chuan, San Antonio. Mike first became involved in martial arts as an American serviceman based in the United Kingdom. And his very first martial art was Tai Chi. And it was Tai Chi practiced as a martial art, full contact. And he was surprised when he returned to the United States to find that there weren't a lot of schools, at least where he was at, that practiced Tai Chi in the manner to which it was intended. So ever since then, he's been traveling around the United States and the world, training with like-minded teachers and students, and furthering the concept of Tai Chi as an actual martial art and a full contact discipline. You can find out more about Mike on Long Fei San Antonio Facebook, and he also has a YouTube channel, Low Kick Slick, where he does breakdowns of Tai Chi push hands competitions. We'll have links to all that in the description. It was really great talking to Mike. He had a lot of interesting stories to tell and insights. He was an entertaining and knowledgeable guy, and I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did doing it. Thanks. All right, Mike Graves, everybody. Hi, Mike. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
Doing well.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, just wanted to say thanks real quick to our mutual friend Chris Marshall for the introduction. So thanks, Chris.
Thanks a lot. Chris has been doing a lot for me, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, he's doing a lot of good work.
Yes.
So Mike, where are you based out of?
I am in San Antonio, Texas, southern part of San Antonio, but San Antonio, Texas is where I am now.
Okay. Were you a Texas native?
I am not. I am a U.S. Air Force transplant, I guess, if
Okay.
you will.
Okay.
That's how I made my way here.
That explains all the travel.
Yeah, well, yeah, that definitely for sure back in the days was what got me around the world without question. Yeah.
Nice. So I want to go back just a little bit. Most people, the first question I ask is how they got started in martial arts and what their first art was. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got into the arts in the first place?
Yeah. So I've been a geek for Chinese martial arts specifically since the days of the Shaw Brothers films. All right. So that
Yeah.
was my interest going back as early as when I was 6 years old. This is going back in the mid 70s. All right. But I never practiced any martial art at all, just had the interest. Or my practice would be watching the movies and going in the backyard and attempting
Yeah.
to do what I saw on TV.
Yeah.
Those are the extent of my experience. And then I was in England, the northern part of England, and I was going through doing some marriage counseling at the time, and there was a suggestion for us to find an activity that we could do together.
Yeah.
And so as we were looking through, and this is a place called Harrogate in England, in North Yorkshire of England.
Yorkshire.
We
Yeah.
were in we're in the town center there, and we saw this advertisement for a Tai Chi class. And I had a book on martial arts that covered all various aspects of martial arts, and so I had read about it and had a very small familiarity with it. And so I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And so we pulled the tab. I was the only one who actually went to the class after it was the day to go. And that was my first introduction at 25 years old into Tai Chi, and then also into formally into martial arts. And even that class itself wasn't necessarily martial, but it
Yeah.
was my introduction to martial arts, if you will.
Yeah. So you've been pretty much Tai Chi the whole time then?
That's it. Yeah. And
Wow.
I've dabbled a little bit into Xingyi and Bagua
Okay.
simply because I had went into learning the Sun style.
Yeah.
So I got some of the eight palm changes, and then the five animals in the linking form. That's my extent of those two, if you will. But aside from that, yeah, it's been all Tai Chi.
This is kind of off the track just a little bit, but I just wanted to ask for my own personal curiosity. What was your favorite Shaw Brothers film? Or do you have
Oh,
one?
and so I have a series of them, music videos I've made of them. And so I would have to say my favorite would be the first one I ever saw in the cinema. What got me attracted to it was called, well, the original name was called Four Assassins, but it also has a side name called Marco Polo as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
So I saw that. My brother, and this is like obviously very 70s. My brother was 13. I was 6 years old. I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina originally,
Okay.
right? So we took a bus from our house downtown. He wanted to take me to some day matinee
Yeah.
movies, and there was three films on. And so the very first film was the Four Assassins, and then followed up by a Bruce Lee movie called Dynamo, And then the main of the triple header was Bruce Lee's the Big Boss, or
Yeah.
the original one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but when I saw the Shaw Brothers one, I was like, whoa! I really didn't even care. I mean, I liked the other two, but not as much as I like.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was it. That's been my favorite because that's what brought me into it. But I love so many of them though.
Yeah, me too. It's hard to pick a favorite. So,
Yeah, it is.
when we're growing up, 'cause I was the same. I was a Shaw Brothers junkie too when I was a kid. Still am really, but like
Yeah, me too.
when you watch those movies, you get a preconceived notion of what martial arts are like or what you feel like they should be like, because there's a lot of fighting, a lot of action. When you started doing Tai Chi, did you automatically start looking for you said your first class wasn't very martial, but were you sort of trying in your mind, trying to see the fighting applications and what you were learning?
Um, I, I was a good student and just like pay attention to what was coming my way. In my mind, I've already so aside from being into the martial arts like that, at point in time I was doing dance choreography and I was a b-boy, I was a break dancer.
Yeah.
So I had that little nature of how to move a certain
Right.
way, and I was just going to take whatever I learned and incorporate what I did from dance into it, regardless, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but in the classes, my very first classes, so you get an example, is very similar introduction. I was standing there with a hard frame, and my teacher did a demo on me where he put his hands on my forearms, pushed me back. I went back quite far, like, whoa, what the heck?
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, whatever this dude's showing me, I'm gonna learn it. That
Yeah.
and my first two classes was basically the opening of the form, where you step out, you lift your hands shoulder height, and then literally that was it. Then I closed my legs back, go back to the beginning. I
Right.
did that for 2 weeks, and the classes were hour and a half. So the first 30 minutes was like some pretty intense qigong, and
Yeah.
then an hour of me just doing stepping out, lifting my arms, right. And he was a traditional Yang stylist, as well as he was teaching me at the time Chin Ching. That was my very first form, was the Chin
Okay.
Ching form, right? But yeah, it was very, very paint by numbers,
Yeah.
literally like that, And so I wasn't even trying to get ahead of myself. I
Yeah.
figured this guy know what he was doing. I was
Right.
just gonna pay attention. Yeah.
Nice. So how long did you stay at that school?
Wow. Probably 3 to 4 years.
Mhm.
And the reason being is because um, in, in tandem, and I just did a recent interview with my martial arts instructor, but in tandem to him, he passed me on to what became my full-time primary teacher.
Yeah.
They were friends, and I went to go learn from my his name is David Nicholson, who's my primary teacher. My first teacher name was Bob France.
Okay.
So Bob, I asked Bob a question because again, I mentioned earlier I had a book on martial arts, and inside the book I was also reading about Bagua, and I wanted to learn Bagua because it sounded super cool, right?
Yeah.
And then so I've been learning with Bob probably about maybe 5 or 6 months, maybe slightly longer, but somewhere around that time frame. And I mentioned to him about, I wanted to also learn about Bagua. We're just having this general conversation. And he said, I have a friend that teaches it. Maybe I can put you in contact with him at some point in time. And keep in mind, this was like pre really cell phone stuff type thing and everything like that. So I had to kind of wait for the passage of information and go back and forth and things like that. So eventually he got something set up with me for to meet David Nicholson. And I went to go see him to learn Bagua. And so, like I mentioned, I've been practicing Tai Chi not very long, but long enough to have some moves under my belt type thing. So I'm thinking probably more. It was pretty close to a year, so I had a good amount of the Chin Ching like under my belt, I guess, if you will. And he asked me, and I had also started dabbling into the traditional Yang as well. So he started showing me both Bob France, and so I went to go to Dave, and he said, "Well, yeah, Bob said you want to learn Bagua. Let's have a look at your Tai Chi." So I'm in his little training room in his house, and he's sitting there watching me go through the movements. And I tell this to everyone, and I've said this many of times. He looks at my phone, and he goes, "Your Tai Chi's crap. I'm not teaching you any Bagua. I'm teaching you fix your Tai Chi."
Yeah.
And so both of them became my teachers. And so I was going to classes probably 5, sometimes 6 times a week between the both of them. And that was like 3 to 4 years of going to both. And then, not that I don't think I necessarily quit with Bob. I know Bob eventually went to start traveling, going back and forth to Thailand. and doing some other things. And I would go with Bob like to seminars, to Bruce Francis seminars. There's a guy by the name of Michael Shea, and there's a lot of these were heavy into Qigong. So Bob was more, and I always say this, his Yang style was so foundationally good, if that's a word. The foundation was so significant. He taught me good structure and did a lot of what we call, like the chap style, where he's testing out all my movements in the form. But they weren't martial, but they were martially sound, if you were going to use them. Where Dave, the same thing, the same kind of tutelage, but Dave was the martial guy. And so Bob, I was traveling all over the place doing all kind of Qigong methodologies. And Bob was to the point where he was, as Dave said, he was almost on the sorcery side because he was into the Templars, the Druids,
Oh, really?
Reiki,
Yeah.
you name it. He was on that line of stuff, and deep into the Qigong practices. So I got a lot of that with him, and it was kind of like traveling around with him, up and down the UK with doing the Qigong stuff. And then I was just going to classes with Dave and learning and doing private lessons actually with him. And that's how our initial engagement was on a private lesson kind of thing. Then I started going to his classes as well. Just why I was like 5 times a week because I was doing private lessons as well as going to the classes with both of them and learning the forms and things. So Dave was the martial guy, learning all the intricacies of what the movements meant in applications. Bob had applications, but they were the rudimentary applications, for each posture. Nothing too deep, I guess you will. But they were, like I said, they were very sound applications, if you will.
So you're getting sort of the esoteric stuff from one side and the more martial start stuff from the other side.
Indeed, yes, sir, for
Very
sure.
nice.
Yeah.
So, you kind of have a reputation for full contact fighting with Tai Chi. When did that start? Did that start when you were in England?
It did. Yeah, yes. All of this started in England. It started, I guess, when did I start doing? Probably around 97, 98 is when I started doing the martial, like full contact, I guess, if you will. And so I have a short history with it. I started in 95.
Okay.
But, and I don't want to say, yeah, I guess I can say I was fast tracked, but fast track was through my diligent practice. And like I mentioned, I was going so regularly. Like when Dave and I would practice, we would go 1 or 2 hours of private lessons. Then I was going to his classes. Some were 2 hours, some were an hour and a half. Same with Bob. You know what I mean? So, and whatever I learned, and I would go home and practice, and pouring it into my body, I guess, if you
Right,
will.
right.
And then my body being, getting, acclimated, getting acclimated to all the postural work, all the understanding of how to breathe, and this incorporating all this stuff. So by the time I did started off doing pushing hands competitions, and using pushing hands as a bridge to go into the full contact kind of things, if you will. It was a true bridge for me in that regard. But 97, 98 is when I started doing my first full contact matches, if you will.
So tell me a little bit about that. What was your first experience in full contact match like?
Well, I haven't posted up. So my very first one ever is actually on my channel, and it was extremely fun. It was because I had obviously, if you look at it, I had great success, but also coming out of the world of pushing hands, I didn't have a great grasp necessarily on striking and definitely into kicks and things like that. So what you really see is a true transition from coming out of the pushing hands world and going into using the dynamic applications of that in a full contact reference. So there are a lot of throws in there, a
Yeah.
lot of takedowns,
Yeah.
a couple pushes and things like that thrown in there. And then there's a few, smashing with the fist. How it ended it was with the nice straight punch to the face. But I give that as far as the power that was generated from that more so than the actual technique of the punch, I guess, if you will. But it was a true bridge coming from the transition of form, pushing hands, all the different patterns from Dalu to, single changes, to double pushing hands, all the traditional patterns of pushing hands, going into freestyle pushing hands, and then going directly into using that in a dynamic against people who don't do what you do, and not familiar with you at all, and then being able to apply that in that dynamic kind of environment.
Yeah. I think it's a surprise to a lot of people. I don't know how it is in Europe, but it's a surprise to a lot of people in the United States to see that sort of use of Tai Chi. Because people go to Tai Chi for lots of different things. Some people go for like health or relaxation, and then there are varying levels of how exactly martial that you can get with it, in a competition situation. And I remember I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I saw a video of a push hands competition, and it was some of William C.C. Chen's guys in New York
Yeah.
City. And all I'd ever seen of push hands was just, your standard, very polite push hands. And these guys were locking each other's joints and throwing each other to the ground. And I said, this is Tai Chi. I had no idea.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it comes as a surprise to a lot of people. Um, what do you think of sort of the full contact Tai Chi in the United States? What's your experience of that like?
Well, I've never had a competition. I've seen it. So I'll be like full disclosure. So I came back to the U.S. in 2001. So I was in England. I was in England in Europe for a long time, from like dang, when did I get there? 89, and I came back to the U.S. in 2001 to
Oh,
actually
it's been a
live.
long
And then
time.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was quite some time. And then when I came back, and I had my interpretation of what Tai Chi was, and it was, quite martial
Yeah,
in that aspect. When I came back to the U.S., it was very difficult to find folks who were practicing in that same vein, at least down here in Texas.
yeah,
Everyone was kind of still doing, the form practice, some pushing hands, but not much as far as using it as a fighting art, at least down here. Later on, I found there was a fair bit on the East Coast, of folks doing it up in the New York, and also in the Maryland area, and then also outside, out on the West Coast that folks were doing it. But like where I was, not many people were. Now, as I started to spread my wings, I started to find that there were people that were down here who kind of did it, but they would go outside of the state to go and get into competitions, if you will, to kind of get that experience. But my first exposure to it down here, I was like so disappointed. I pretty much became almost like a hermit with my own stuff, because it was like, and I'm not saying this to try to offend anyone, but it was not what I was looking for as far as the flavor of Tai Chi. And I almost felt like I was this ruffian coming into the Tai Chi world, like with all
yeah,
my rough stuff, you know what I mean? And,
yeah,
some of my stuff, they were like, oh, you're too lead. Lead? I'm not, it's not strength, dude. This is how I train Tai Chi. I'm not, the effort that I'm putting in this is not muscle strength or anything like that. This is good postural stuff that I'm using, and good technique. And I have a full understanding of using it against people with full pressure. So you may have not had this kind of experience before, but I don't have any other art to rely on. It's
right.
just strictly Tai Chi that I'm using, and my line. So you understand, I'm a Yang traditionalist, as far as the style I based it on. I did learn some modern styles later on, and in our practice, which is like the 24 and the 42 and all that good business. But all those are flavored with the Yang style tradition, a traditional form, and that comes from the line that we had was under a guy by the name of Chu King Hung. Those are the two people, my two people I trained with, Bob France and David Nicholson, come from that line, as far as the Yang style go. And they both had experiences and teachings from Chu King Hung, but also from some of their students and disciples. That's the line that I got my Tai Chi from. That's where I get my Pung, my pushing hands, all that good business all comes from that line. So when I would meet people, and someone very respectable had me, actually a chin stylist who passed away now, by the name of Sal De La Rosa. He passed on two of his students to me to say, hey, keep teaching my guys your stuff. I really appreciate how good your pushing hands is, and you come in here with this great flavor. So I've been working with those guys off and on since like the early 2000s, if you will. As a matter of fact, I have some video with one of the guys. He's gone into jiu-jitsu, and he comes over and we train together quite often. Well, infrequently but often, working on what he may learn in BJJ, what he's working on as far as his chin stuff, and I'm passing on the principles of that. So yeah, so uh, I came here with a scratch on my head. Is like, man, what the heck is going on over here? Type thing. It's like, this is a total different experience for me. And like I said, it became very reclusive in the way I practice my art, and folks would find me in an obscure way. I may pop up in a competition solely by myself, or I had a young student with me back in the early 2000s, like the mid 2000s area. And we would go to competitions together, but I didn't have a school or anything.
Yeah.
Well, like I have a school and a school name, but like, one person underneath me type thing. So it wasn't a fledgling school. So I had my full time job. I'm a computer programmer by trade. So I was doing that, and then I was maybe a glorified hobbyist, a glorified enthusiast with Tai Chi, but it has some skill set. So I was pop up at these competitions and be like, oh shoot, who is this guy? Because I'm not in the mix of the Tai Chi world and things like that. And then folks would hit me up separately and maybe start doing private lessons with me or get me to do a seminar here and there. But that was kind of my exposure really here in the US. And it's pretty much still similar to that way. I don't have a big following in that regard. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that looking for you online, you do tend to, you just like, you're on this side of the country, then you're on this side of the country, and you're over here. And I'm like, where is this guy?
Yeah, I've been as far as field as the Northern Territory of Australia,
Is that
and
right?
and top
Wow.
folks, yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and really all of these travels are really kind of by happenstance, maybe except for one or two where they were actually undetermined in planned trips to go and do some Tai Chi. And I'll say one of those was a retreat in Tampa. But generally speaking, what happens is something is attached to some other activity that I'm actually doing. And then while I'm there, I'll look for people, hey, anyone here does Tai Chi or anything like that. And then I'll go and
Yeah.
get involved. Even the Seattle trip was a family trip that we had planned, and just so happened as I was speaking with Chris, he goes, "Well, I'm going to be having an event during that same time frame." And I was like, "Oh, cool! It lines up. We'll come to the event as well." So yeah, it's usually something like Australia was no different. I was sent down there. I was in Signal Intel
Okay.
in the Air Force, and I got sent down to an area called Pine Gap in Alice Springs, Australia. And so when I was there, the guy who was my sponsor as a trainer, he was also, I think he was in the Army Air Force, but he was my sponsor there, and he was taking me around and taking me around the city and town. And he's like, "Well, I gotta leave a little bit early today. I gotta go take my son to his martial arts class." I said, "Oh, what does he practice?" He goes, "Oh, he practices karate and something else. I think they were doing eskrima and stuff like that." I said, "Oh, cool. I practice martial arts as well. I practice Tai Chi." He goes, "Oh, cool. Oh, you want to come down here with me? I'll introduce you to those guys." So he introduced me. And lo and behold, they had a guy who had learned a little bit of Tai Chi who was trying to teach them Tai Chi. And I was telling them about my experience. So it's like, "Hey, well, while you're here, do you think you can teach us some stuff?" And
Wow.
so I started teaching that while I'm also there doing the communication stuff and everything like that. And that was a great experience as well, too. Yeah. So
Yeah. That's one of the great things about martial arts is that tends to happen. You travel around and it just opens up doors for you. And it's a great community that a lot of people just don't know about till you get in there and get your feet wet.
indeed, it's a very good networking tool. That's why I look at it
Yeah.
as, even when I go to competitions, that's how I meet people, engage with people, and things like that. So, right now we have a good network with one of my good friends now. I met him, almost 20 some years ago. His name is Blue. Let me see if I can say his last name right. C Tanko, C and Tanko, right? So he's out in Houston. He's a chin stylist, and we've been practicing together, off and on, for like some 20 some years. But he does regular meetups, like quarterly, and send-down meetups and pushing hands meetups that we attend, and that's why I get a lot of my good practice in right now, practicing with him. But yeah, I met him through Sal De La Rosa as well as his classmate. They're both done a Chin Tai Chi teacher out in Houston. And so, yeah, I made that connection with him 20 some years ago, and we've kept that going over the years and everything like that. So it's definitely a great networking tool as a martial art.
For sure. So what do you like where you're at right now? Are you teaching? You said you just have like basically one full-time student. Is that still the case right now?
So I teach regularly at a university for the kinesiology program. I teach Tai
Okay.
Chi for that program.
Okay.
And so I have, in that class, I have some athletes and, nurse practitioners, pretty much name the full gamut of the university disciplines there. But it's geared towards the kinesiology program.
Right.
And just this semester, I got two of the guys that, hey, I want to do this outside the classroom. So I'm working with two young fellows now that's wanting to get some exposure. But I have gosh, man, let's see here. I have people very loosely that I've trained and they still hit me up for training. Like I have one guy that's out of Houston, Santanu Rahman. He's a Choli foot practitioner, but I started teaching and working with him on some Tai Chi back in like 2011, 2010. And then just recently, he wanted me to help him with some Sun Style. So we connect either visually, virtually, or over the phone, and I go through the practice of giving him corrections and giving him details on that. I have a guy that I've been working with since 2012. His name is Sean Kavorik, and
Yeah.
he would be probably a student of mine, I guess, if you will. He had learned quite a bit of Tai Chi well before I met him. But he started learning some more, detailed stuff with me in regards to the traditional Yang, the modern 24, the pushing hands context, and all the martial stuff as well as trying to get an understanding of how to apply it, in the competition Sandow world and things like that. But I've been working with him for quite some time. The guy that I mentioned earlier, his name is Tony Loca, who's a chin stylist, and we still work together. I give him a lot of pushing hand stuff we do together. And like I mentioned, just about a couple of weeks ago, he came over. He's doing jujitsu now. He's been doing it for 2 to 3 years now, and he's like, "Yeah, we do a lot of stuff, but we really start on the mat. I was wondering if you could help me work with my takedown defense and work with me on doing some stand-up grappling
Yeah.
takedowns and do whatever." Okay, cool beans. And then I have one guy who just started with me last week, actually, last week. But he's learning. He's a chin stylist, and he was given to me by Tony's classmate, the one that I mentioned from Sal De La Rosa. He has another student that he asked me to look after, as far as the pushing hands go, named David Klein. And David Klein's been teaching this fellow chin style as well as a bit of Wing Chun. And he's like, hey, yeah, Mike does Shingi. So he came to learn from me starting last week to learn some Shingi. So those are kind of the people that I have under my wing. And my other half, Maria, she's been with me for now about for 8 years and been learning,
Awesome.
loosely learning Tai Chi with me. But you'll see her in a lot of my videos and doing some pushing hand stuff. And folks will give her own accolades about her efficiency in pushing hands. Now she's not a diehard like me. She's a massage therapist, so now she's being very cautious about her arms.
Right.
Those are her tools,
Yeah.
so she
Right.
doesn't like to mix it up as much as I do. But you'll see her and doing some of the the sanda meetups, doing some other fighting stuff. But she loves doing pushing hands, and she loves to mix it up with different folks in that regard. So I look at her as one of my day in day out students, I guess, if you will. But yeah, that's kind of how it's been flowing for me as far as folks learning. But I've only taken a step now to go more serious about being a more closer to a full-time teacher. I haven't looked at it as such, and folks have told me over the years that I should do, and I've had classes and things like that, but I'm funny about it, right? I'm funny about it, and folks get on my case. Excuse me, get on my case about it because I'm so martially oriented. And if I'll have a class full of seniors, maybe we may do it standing or sitting if they can't do it standing, if you will. Over the years, I've done that a lot. I've had classes where I've just focused on principles. I had a class called Principles of Tai Chi Chuan, where it wasn't necessarily going through the sequence of forms, but we'll take a movement and we'll focus on that movement throughout the class. And I'm reinforcing those principles, but then also give them an understanding how they can apply these principles in their everyday life doing other activities,
Right.
if you will.
Right.
And so I've never really kind of pushed being a full-time Tai Chi teacher in regards of that because I was always looking for the full-time Tai Chi martial artist. But
Yeah.
I think when you talk about that, most folks who really kind of learn a martial art may flock to jujitsu, Muay Thai, or the full-fledged MMA type of schools that really look for a martial art that they see
Yeah.
that has some practicalities in that regard. And you're going to find that your typical audience for Tai Chi. folks coming because the doctor recommended it, someone's recommended it for calmness on the mind and body alignment and things like that. Even in the university, it's kind of geared towards that. And then when they hear like it's a martial art, they're like, I didn't know that. And then we do some applications in class, and they're like, "Whoa, this is super cool!" But
Right.
only have a few that's come to me afterwards. Maybe about, I'll say a few, at least over the years, about 5 or 6 that have come to me afterwards, like, hey, I want to learn more about it. And
Yeah.
because of once they graduate college, their discipline takes them out of the area, so that kind of
Yeah.
ends our tutelage type
Yeah.
thing. But so that's kind of how it's been for me, to be
Yeah.
honest.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, that's my experience too. And I teach Xingyi, but I found that a lot of it's gotten kind of strange in the past few years because I found that I'm actually having more young people come to me looking for Xingyi because they think internal means that it's soft and,
Yes.
for your health, for your
Right
health
on.
and things like that. And then but I have a lot of older students too. And I've actually found that a lot of my older students are really interested in the martial applications because once they get their feet wet and realize that it's a safe environment to learn in, they want to learn more of that type of stuff.
Right on.
And I tell all my students, it's like, yeah, this is good for your health, but it's a martial art. And the closer that you practice it to a martial art, the better it'll be for your health.
Yeah, yes. And then so even when I teaching the older folks, I tell them right off the bat that, even though you may do it seated or standing, I teach you the same way I'll be teaching my guys who are martial artists.
Yeah.
Because, I said the health benefits that you're intending to receive comes from the proper structure and the proper way of placing your body in alignment. And so, and that comes from, I don't want to lock my arms out because I lock my arms out, somebody can lock out my arm.
Right.
I don't want to lock out my knees. Somebody can kick me in the knee, hyperextend it. So not only the healthy, from a martial perspective, but from a health perspective, it's treating you it's showing you how to treat your joints and support them for your muscle development and getting your muscles to support you in proper posture, so that when you're doing other activities, it follows right in line. So yeah,
Right.
definitely got it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned that, you've gone around and trained with some of these other people, students of yours and things like that. What would a student expect if they came to train with you? What do you have like, obviously you tailor it a little bit depending on who you're teaching, but what is your typical training process like? Say you had a beginning student, where would you start them out with?
So I normally start out with particularly if they're going to learn a form. We'll do some very rudimentary postural stuff. I talk about how to relax the lower back, and tuck your pelvis, if you will, in the proper manner, so you have a nice suppleness in your knees and a nice bend in your knees, hollowing out the chest. So I work a lot more so on posture and very, very similar to my first teacher. You get a very little bit of movement in regards to form postures. You're going to get, a small dose of what this posture is and how to, get into it. But we're going to look at your alignment in that posture. So, and then we're doing, my version of chap style. I'm testing that posture out for structural support. How grounded are you? How relaxed are you in that posture? And I'll give you some rudimentary application around that so you can see how to apply it. And then I'm heavy in analogies, right? So I'm saying, like, if you're lifting your arms, I'll say it's like, I'll give a few analogies. Like, imagine that you're lifting a kettlebell and you bring your arms up. And so you have to use your legs and tuck your hips to get that kettlebell up. Or if you're lifting a heavy window, you bring that window up, right? So you're kind of using that
Yeah.
lift. And the same thing when you bring your hands down, that window's heavy. So you bring it all down with the body. So I'm heavy into analogies, and then I'll use myself as their test bed. I'll allow myself to be their tool for getting this understanding. So it's very, again, paint by the numbers. And everything that's part of the teaching is understanding, the breath, understanding intent, watch where your eyes are, not looking down, and things like that. Making sure that you're fully engaged into the practice, and everything is as a unit as far as understanding how to bring that one posture into the proper engagement, I guess, if you will. So I also use, as I was just did an interview with Damon Bramage
Yeah.
the other day. We did a 3-hour interview. It was awesome. But he was talking about like using what we call training aids. So I have a series of training aids, and things outside of the body that I'll use for helping you get into that structure. I have medicine balls. I have poles and things like that for make sure your hands are like coming up in balance, if you will. Anything that I feel that's going to give you a better understanding of how to be in that right position, if you will. So um, yeah, you'll get a heavy dose, a lot of detail thrown at you.
Yeah.
And I record a lot. So I do the recording both for myself and both for the students so that they can look at the corrections I'm making, and then they can look at themselves. And also, like just like me, and I don't have them all available to me now, but I have loads of VHS tapes of my learning. So back in the day, I used to watch and see one for my progress, but also look and see how I'm making the changes or what I'm doing that's off, or something later on I started to repeat that I had fixed and now it's coming back into play. I have that as a reference. So I do that for my students as well. So and I have them go back and look. I even in my university classes, that's how I teach as well. We have video assignments, and I say, okay, you're going to grade yourself on these 10 principles, if you will. Go back and look at it. You're going to grade it, then I'm going to grade it, so that you're paying attention to what those details are, so that you understand exactly what you're trying to learn.
Yeah.
So this kind of overall my methodology, you know what I mean? But right off the bat, like I mentioned earlier, even with my even with the folks who are not doing it martially, I bring in a martial application so they understand where their wrist to hand to elbows to shoulders should be. And if you're trying to push someone out, that way you have that understanding of how to use the body in totality. And then you understand it. Like now, if I'm pulling a door, now I'm not just using my arm. Now I'm going like this with the whole body to pull that door open. It's no different, if you will. So yeah, from the very beginning, it's all tied together.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier when you were living in England that you did a lot of qigong. I'm assuming some of the qigong is what people refer to as hard qigong. Is that something that you incorporate into your teaching process at all? Do you use qigong as a conditioning tool, or?
Yeah, I do, particularly for those in the martial aspect. But even in, like I said, even in the university class, I don't really teach them anything differently than the others. Now, there's a heart body kind of the conditioning type stuff. I may not go into that kind of stuff, but we do the tapping. You know what I mean? We do
right.
that kind of stuff. With it's all still relative. We do all the breathing practices, do the triple heaters. We do, all the reverse breathing techniques. I mean, a litany of things that I use, and I don't. So when I talk to my other half, Maria, about it, because she's very into the esoteric side of things, if you will. And I said, well, when I was coming up, we didn't necessarily, even though there was a separation between Qigong and the Tai Chi, as we were doing it, we didn't necessarily treat them as a separate entity as far as development goes.
Right.
We know that these are Qigong, like the Daoyin practices over here, the 8 brocades over here, so forth and so on. However, I'm using these as the totality to make my body and my mind and everything empower and develop together and cultivate together into this united entity, right? So when I teach folks, I'm teaching in that same vein. I'm teaching this so that your body is fully, and comprehensively developing as this one tool that you can apply. Now if you want to take these practices and isolate your qigong over here, for this, and if you want to do it so that you can get your level of focus, or you want to work on this particular, I do this one. Oh, now I can't even think of the name, but it was like a liver normalizing and qigong. So if you want to take that and just do it on its own, that's fine and dandy too. But know as you're doing it, it's still working your body as a unit, if you will. So yeah, I teach everything still as a company. Sometimes I may even have a qigong practice out of a whole set of things, but I'm doing with this set, this one over here, along with this one over here, and so they're outside of the full set, if you will, just so that it may be geared towards what we're going to work on that day, where I don't want to tie in the whole kind of Daoyin per se, but I want to use this particular movement from this Qigong and this one over here, because it's going to tie into how we're going to be working the legs today, or how we're going to be working our stances today, so forth and so on. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So as you're traveling around to all these different schools, Are you seeing a evolution, do you think, overall, like in the United States with Tai Chi? Have you seen it change much since you came back?
Um, well, no, the greatest thing that I see is the diversity and learning and diversity and understanding and diversity in pathways and the diversity in meaning to what Tai Chi is to everyone, right? Everyone has definitely come from different schools of learning. Everyone's come into Tai Chi for different reasons. So I relate it to politics and to religion, right? So, obviously we just came out of this very big political bubble, we're in now. And some people are Democrats for like each person may be a Democrat, but they're Democrat for different reasons.
Right,
You know what I mean? Same thing for Republicans.
right,
Some for economy, some for the conservatism of or whatever. So, but everyone may call themselves that, but they come there for different reasons.
right,
Tai Chi is no different. And that's why I find as I go around, and I've kind of known this even from my earlier days, but even more so now because it's more outspoken, it's more global, it's more of a global connection, via social media and via the way that we all travel and get together. You see that people come for different reasons, and they express that as you're practicing with them. Now, you may have a connection as to maybe similar skill sets or similar practices that you do or similar concepts on the way that things are articulated or developed. But those similarities, tend to go off on different branches as to the reasoning as to why they're done, and the reasons as to what they mean to a person, and reason to what the significance is, and as far as importance within
right,
the practice. You
right,
know, so I don't know what that means as far as what Tai Chi has as far as a future practice. And I think it's like with anything, it has all these fragmentations
yeah,
that's going to have, it going out in the future as being a large kind of encompassing thing that has all these different kind of relations to it, if you will. You know what I mean? But nothing is tying it down to one significant thing, and that's what I'm finding. It's just such a diverse world. And even people from the same schools, even in my own school, people will start to practice and do it for different reasons. You know what I mean? And have different purposes. There's only two of us in my school that actually did some full contact with it, and even there's only some of us that did pushing hands competitions.
right.
So then there's only some of us that even kept practicing certain forms. So even within the same school, it branched off, into differences. So now, if you're looking at it on a more of a global or more national scale, it's greatly diverse. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
very
So
true.
that's what I've come to find. But the greatest thing I do find is that um, it's a fun community to be in, despite all of the disparaging comments people may have for some folks, or the disagreements that may be out there and stuff like that. That gets very, heated and engaged. It's a definitely a growing community of characters and people that allows you to go get a mix of things. And I relate this to um, when I push hands, I say this is my common reference. It's like every time you engage with someone, and particularly you get to practice with them, it's like reading a different book,
Yeah,
right? And that becomes informed knowledge for you, because now you read this book. Oh, that's different. I read this book over here. That's different, but that becomes knowledge for you. So now, as you gain all this knowledge, when you start to get an understanding and be able to employ that outwardly, you say, "Oh, I'm familiar with this now. I can deal with this. Oh, I'm familiar with this. Oh, this. Oh, I have to play a little bit softer with this person. I'm used to
right.
playing soft like this." So you get so informed. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? And that's something of a benefit to yourself, as opposed to just thinking like, "Oh, they're not doing it right. Like they're not doing it like me." It
yeah,
becomes something as a collective knowledge for yourself, if you will.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it never ends. You know,
Right on.
it's a lifelong thing, and I think one of the great things about it is that you mentioned that different people come to it for different reasons. Even within an individual person, those reasons can change over time too. Yeah,
Indeed, yes,
yeah.
for sure.
They know they have for me. I'm a lot different person now than I was when I was 19 years old. Thank God.
Right, right. And I was having the interview with Damon Bramich, and he mentioned the exact same thing. He came on a very starting young with other martial practices, but it came from a very strong martial background
Right.
to like right now. He goes, yeah, my focus really now is making people healthy. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And making people really get a good practice and making themselves, develop into the better selves. That's my main focus right now. I can do all the martial stuff and I had all that experience, but now that's not where I'm geared towards. You know what I mean? So yeah, definitely. And I think eventually I may get to that point.
Not there yet. Feel like,
but but right now, and I'm not. So I have a very playful nature. So
yeah.
I'm not a very aggressive person. That's why I think Tai Chi has been very kind of the right thing for me.
Mm.
The very passive nature of it, the yin and yang engagement and things like that, it suits my nature. I wouldn't have been a great karateka, or I wouldn't be very good at Muay Thai because I didn't have that aggressive kind of like, oh, killer
Right.
instinct. I have a very playful instinct. And I have a very, it's like I would see if we go back to the Shaw Brothers type of reference, right? I would find myself, if you remember the kid with golden arms, the
Oh yeah.
inspector, where he's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
playful, or the lizard. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I'm that kind of character. I
Yeah.
can learn so many different things, but I can play around with it. I can have fun with it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I can, That's my nature with it. As I can show my skill, but we can have fun as I do that, and I don't need to kind of like subject you to any like hard aggressiveness that's to prove what the skill set is. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's my nature, and I think Tai Chi fits me to a T in that regard. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. A question I wanted to ask you, I've been asking people recently. I just started asking people a few interviews ago. Is that what do you think about? Well, the way that I usually preface this is when I was younger, I did a lot of Japanese martial arts, and so I
Sure.
had some Japanese teachers and Japanese classmates, and they all went to public schools in Japan. And in Japan, when they were growing up, they had to. It was mandatory that they either take judo or kendo when they were in school.
Sure.
The girls had to take like a naginata based like martial art or kendo.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about martial arts as a like? I don't want to use the word mandatory, but what do you think about making martial arts available in like American public schools or Canadian public schools? What do you think about that
We'll
idea?
say compulsory.
Yeah,
Yeah,
compulsory is a good word.
yeah. I think it would be a great benefit. So I have a young daughter, and my other Maria, she has some young granddaughters, and we put them into karate.
Yeah,
Starting as I think Chloe was probably 3, and 3, 4, and 5 is when they first started in their karate class, right? And we noticed right off the bat a change in their nature. And then when COVID happened, they got pulled out of the class, and then after COVID, we put them into jujitsu, and
just
we saw, obviously they heard their challenges being, one being girls, and then getting in and having to roll with little boys and maybe a little bit stronger and more aggressive than them. But it changes their nature and changes the way they engage with things, if you will. And I think as a tool for getting past certain hurdles of engagement, certain hurdles as societal norms, is very beneficial.
yeah,
And as a martial art, I mean, I lived in Germany, so Germany had this thing where when you finished school, you had a choice of either being, basically your social service. You can either be like a social worker, working in community, or you had to do military service.
right.
That's giving back to the country, if you will, right? But I think in this aspect is giving back into the development of a child and the development of the nature of being engaged with others, for one, and then also self-awareness about self. So
Yeah,
that way you can have some sense of comfort about how to work within your body, work within your mind through some challenging moments, and having that moment where you're being dominated per se, and having to go through that crying moment of feeling like, man, I'm not, physically able to deal with this. And now it's making me have a mental challenge. You know what I mean? Not necessarily a mental breakdown, but it may be a case in some aspects. But I think getting that early on is very beneficial. I think, and being able to understand your physical body, and using that for whatever aspect you may take it on later on, I think is very significant. And I know it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes for people because everyone in society has a different view of how to engage. And so, when we were growing up, and I know in the '70s we had PE that was very physical. You know
right,
what I mean? We did
right.
all sorts from from all the games to even
Dodgeball.
yeah, dodgeball, even to square dance
Right.
and
Yeah.
PE class. You
We
know
had
what
to
I'm
do.
saying?
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was a lot of different varieties of physical activity, and I think it did a lot for me. And I was an asthmatic child,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
I couldn't go into any sponsored sports because I had asthma. So Tai Chi and later on was very good for me because I didn't get the activities that I wanted to do. I was very athletic, but it wasn't long standing, because
Sure.
I
Yeah.
get my breathing issues going on. So then that ended that for probably for a week or two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't never do anything heavy. But I do see there's definitely a benefit in that if that could be something that's done. I have a book that I use even for my classes. And it's in reference to that. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Had to dig it out here in my bag. Sorry about that. So this is a book. If I can hold it up, I know it's backwards. All right, so the Chinese way of
Health and fitness.
family health and fitness. Right. So this book is very good because what it does, it talks about obviously all the good wushu stuff, and I'm trying to get to what it does here. So it starts off, if you can see this, it says first your exercises, and it starts off where showing you how to do exercises for your toddler, your baby, and things like that, right?
Wow. Great. Yeah.
Yeah, and gets all the way into early childhood things like that, if you
Oh,
will. You
that's
can see,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. So and basically it's talking about it. So it gets obviously into the young kids doing the more of the wushu stuff and things like that. But yeah, so this is something I've already had been trying to incorporate myself in that regard and things like that. So and because obviously other cultures definitely do
Right.
that. And I think it's a very significant thing. I wish we could do something like that in regards to our youth, if you will. So I know it's a very long-winded answer, but
No, it's a great answer. You brought up a lot of great points, and it's just something that I really wish that we would get out there because we have a lot of different issues, but I think that it would help a lot with school violence, children's self-esteem, all of the things that you mentioned. I
yes,
look at my own life at kids. You can tell such a difference between a
yeah.
child that's been in martial arts and a child that hasn't, as far
Oh,
as
definitely.
composed they are, how healthy they are, their own sense of self-worth, their sense of like keeping boundaries, everything. It's just
Indeed,
yeah,
indeed. Sense of accomplishment too, as
right.
well.
Yeah,
One of the things with the girls that we recognize, because all right, so they love it, right? We go back.
that's awesome.
One point I'm going to make is what they love is just like I mentioned to you earlier about I'm a heavy into recording,
Yeah,
right? So I recorded all like their classes, their early lessons.
yeah,
They love to go back and look at how they were back
yeah,
then, like now, because now, so they started. It was at 3, 4, and 5. So
yeah.
now they are 9, 10, and 11, right? So now they go back and they laugh at the videos, like, look
Right.
how you're kicking there, look how you're doing it there. But now they'll get on the trampoline and they're wrestling with each other, they're grappling, they'll be in the
Yeah,
living room and they're engaged with each other to do that. But now they moved into like softball right now. They're on the softball teams and
yeah.
things like that. So that athleticism from them being girly girls to
Right.
they're not tomboyish or anything like that. But that sense of like, oh, getting into activities, definitely see that was a smoother transition for them and get them to be engaged into physical activities. It's definitely a thing, if you will. So and to watch them look at how they were before and see how they've come up and made changes and things like that based on how they were. It's funny, not only to them but to us as well, because
Yeah,
they get a reference to how their learning process went. So
yeah.
it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that is awesome. So we're just about out of time, but we're going to have you back very soon with another Tai Chi roundtable with Chris Marshall
Awesome.
and Frankie Kyle the third from Shingy Martial Arts Club in Dayton, Ohio. I'm
Yes.
really looking forward to that. But
Excellent.
for our last question, I just wanted to ask you what are your plans for the future? What do you see as the future of Tai Chi?
Well, one of my goals is to eventually get a Sanda team together. This is what I want to do.
Nice.
And aside from that, is work with other Tai Chi schools and or practitioners that are trying to um, hone in more of the balanced skill sets of Tai Chi. And what I mean by that, then that's not about pushing anyone out. There's just such a diverse group where we're like trying to keep ourselves separate because we do different things. But you know, we have the old school understanding of Yang style, went to Wu style, House style, into
Right.
Sun style. And I don't want to exclude Chin, you know, but you obviously there's always that little kind of debate between, you know, what Chin was and all that good. But so that's included because I practice with Chin folks,
Right.
is to do just that. Hey, let's get a cohesion together of bringing Tai Chi into this form, no matter which way you do it, and bring it back to the forefront of what we want it to be as far as our practice. And again, that's why let's not pushing anything out. So if you have people on your thing that wants to do it for health, let them get some understanding from all the groups of people so that we're not so segmented and things like that. And you know, and bring it together as that bubble of that one word, you know, that one phrase, Tai Chi Chuan. Let it be that collectively, not separately, if you will. So and because that's one of the things you mentioned earlier about my travels, is that I've been able to travel with different styles of practitioners and have a very great civil positive engagement that's left, you know, a new collection of friends, if you will. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
Maybe, you know, maybe friends is maybe not the strongest word, you know, but definitely a network of people that we're able to have like minds that want to push the art forward. So that's my main goal. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll look forward to seeing that happening. And I really appreciate you talking to me today. And like I said, we'll do it again soon. And I'm looking forward to this conversation between the four of us coming up soon. So, Mike Graves, Mike, you want to tell anybody where they can find you here?
Wow, that's a hard one. Well, you can find me primarily on YouTube under Low Kick Slick Long Fei Tai Chi Chuan Association of San Antonio. My other biggest presence is probably going to be on Facebook under my name, Mike Graves, and also have the page on Long Fei Tai Chi Chuan Association of San Antonio as well. And you can find a lot of my video material or just topics on Tai Chi in both those arenas.
Awesome. We'll put links to all that in the description. Mike Graves, thanks very much.